The notification sound from my phone cut through the silence of the executive boardroom like a blade. 23 floors above Manhattan's financial district, I sat alone with $3 billion worth of documents spread across the mahogany table, each page representing months of meticulous planning. The acquisition of Meridian Technologies by Blackstone Ventures was 96 hours from completion, and I was the only person in the world who could make it happen. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Samantha Chen, and until that Tuesday morning in November, I was the Senior Vice President of Mergers and Acquisitions at Blackstone Ventures. I had spent the last 18 months orchestrating what would become the largest tech acquisition in corporate history. The irony wasn't lost on me that my career would end with a text message, just as I was about to close the deal that would define my legacy, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all began. 18 months earlier. I was sitting in the corner office of Blackstone's Chicago headquarters, watching Lake Michigan's waves crash against the shore through floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun cast long shadows across my desk, where a single folder marked "Confidential" held the preliminary research on Meridian Technologies. At 34, I had already closed deals worth over $8 billion, but nothing had prepared me for what I was about to discover. Meridian wasn't just another tech company. They had developed something that would revolutionize how the world processed information. Their quantum computing breakthrough could perform calculations in seconds that would take traditional computers decades. The military applications alone were worth billions, but the civilian potential was limitless. Financial modeling, climate prediction, medical research, artificial intelligence, every major industry would be transformed. The company was founded by Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a former MIT professor who had assembled a team of the world's brightest minds. They operated out of a converted warehouse in Austin, Texas, deliberately keeping a low profile. Most of the tech world didn't even know they existed. That secrecy was about to become their greatest asset and their biggest vulnerability. I had discovered Meridian through a contact at the patent office. A routine search for emerging technologies had flagged their intellectual property filings. The language in their patents was deliberately obscure, designed to protect their innovations while meeting legal requirements. But I could read between the lines. After 15 years in technology mergers, I had developed an instinct for revolutionary developments. The first challenge was getting Dr. Hartwell to take a meeting. She had turned down acquisition offers from every major tech company, including 3 separate approaches from different divisions within our own parent company. Her assistant politely declined my initial outreach, explaining that Meridian was not interested in partnerships or acquisitions of any kind. I spent 2 weeks researching Dr. Hartwell's background, looking for an angle that might get her attention. She had published papers on quantum coherence theory, served on the National Science Foundation's advisory board, and held patents in 17 countries. But the detail that caught my attention was buried in an obscure academic journal from 2019. She had written a guest editorial about the commercialization of scientific research, expressing frustration with how profit motives often corrupted pure scientific inquiry. That gave me an idea. Instead of approaching her with a traditional acquisition proposal, I crafted a letter that focused on scientific preservation. I proposed that Blackstone could provide the resources to expand her research while maintaining complete operational independence. We wouldn't interfere with her work or compromise her scientific integrity. We would simply provide the capital and infrastructure needed to accelerate her timeline. 3 days later, my phone rang. Dr. Hartwell's voice was crisp and professional, with a slight Boston accent that betrayed her academic roots. She agreed to a meeting, but with conditions. No lawyers, no standard presentation materials, and no discussion of valuation. She wanted to understand our intentions before considering any formal negotiations. I flew to Austin the following week. The Meridian facility was unlike any tech company I had ever visited. Instead of the usual startup atmosphere with ping-pong tables and energy drinks, it felt more like a university research laboratory. The walls were covered with whiteboards filled with equations I couldn't begin to understand. The staff moved with quiet purpose, focused entirely on their work. Dr. Hartwell met me in a small conference room adjacent to what she called the quiet lab. She was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes were intensely blue and seemed to evaluate everything with scientific precision. "Ms. Chen," she began, "I've researched your background. Your track record suggests you understand the difference between acquisition and destruction. That's rare in your industry." We talked for 3 hours. She explained the technical aspects of their breakthrough in terms I could understand, while I outlined how Blackstone's resources could accelerate their research timeline by years. The conversation felt more like a collaboration between colleagues than a business negotiation. By the end of our meeting, we had established the framework for what would become the most complex acquisition in Blackstone's history. Dr. Hartwell would maintain complete control over research direction and personnel decisions. Meridian would operate as an independent subsidiary with guaranteed funding for the next decade. The acquisition price would be based on future performance metrics rather than current valuation models. The challenges began immediately. Blackstone's board of directors had never approved an acquisition structure like this. They were accustomed to traditional deals where they could exert immediate control over operations and strategic direction. The idea of paying $4 billion for a company while allowing it to operate independently was unprecedented. I spent the next 6 months building internal support for the deal. I prepared detailed presentations showing how Meridian's technology could revolutionize multiple industries. I brought in external consultants to validate the technical assessments. I even arranged for board members to visit the Austin facility and witness demonstrations of the quantum processors. The breakthrough came when Meridian's technology successfully solved a climate modeling problem that had stumped researchers for decades. The implications were staggering. Their quantum processors could analyze atmospheric data and predict weather patterns with unprecedented accuracy. The commercial applications for agriculture, insurance, and disaster preparedness were worth hundreds of billions of dollars. James Morrison, Blackstone's CEO, finally gave his approval to proceed with formal negotiations. Morrison was a former investment banker who had built his reputation on aggressive acquisitions and cost-cutting. He had initially been skeptical of the Meridian deal, but the climate modeling demonstration convinced him of its potential. "Samantha," he told me during a private meeting in his office, "this could be the deal that defines Blackstone's next decade. But it's also the most expensive bet we've ever made. If this goes wrong, it will take down careers, including mine. I'm trusting you to make this work." The formal negotiation process took another 8 months. Every detail had to be carefully crafted to balance Blackstone's need for return on investment with Meridian's requirements for operational independence. The legal documentation alone filled 17 binders. Patent transfers, employment agreements, research milestone definitions, performance metrics, and exit clauses all had to be precisely defined. Dr. Hartwell proved to be a formidable negotiator. She had assembled a legal team that matched our expertise, and she personally reviewed every clause that could impact her research freedom. She insisted on provisions that would prevent Blackstone from interfering with hiring decisions, research priorities, or publication of scientific results. The most challenging aspect was the valuation methodology. Traditional models based on revenue multiples or asset values didn't apply to a company whose primary value lay in unrealized potential. We ultimately developed a hybrid approach that combined upfront payment with performance-based earnouts tied to specific technological milestones. By October, we had reached agreement on all major terms. The total transaction value was set at $4.2 billion, structured as $2.1 billion in cash at closing with additional payments based on achievement of research and commercialization targets. Dr. Hartwell would continue as CEO of the Meridian subsidiary, with board representation and veto power over strategic decisions. The final documentation phase required coordination between teams in Chicago, Austin, and New York. Every page needed review by specialists in corporate law, intellectual property, securities regulation, and international trade. The complexity was extraordinary, even by the standards of major acquisitions. I had moved temporarily to New York to oversee the final preparations. Blackstone maintained a small office in Manhattan specifically for closing large transactions. The facilities included secure conference rooms, document storage, and direct communication links to regulatory agencies. Everything was designed to handle the intensive final weeks of major deals. The closing was scheduled for Friday, November 15th. All parties would gather in New York to execute the final documents and complete the fund transfers. Dr. Hartwell and her team would fly in from Austin, while Morrison and the Blackstone board members would come from Chicago. The process would take most of the day, with each document requiring multiple signatures and notarizations. By the Tuesday before closing, I was working 18-hour days to ensure every detail was perfect. The document review process had identified several minor issues that needed correction before Friday. Nothing that would derail the deal, but items that required careful attention to avoid delays. I had been at the Manhattan office since 6 that morning, working through the final checklist with our legal team. The conference room was filled with neatly organized stacks of documents, each tagged with colored tabs indicating signature requirements. The atmosphere was tense but optimistic. After 18 months of intensive work, we were finally approaching the finish line. My phone had been buzzing with messages all morning. Status updates from the various teams, confirmation of travel arrangements, and routine administrative notifications. I had learned to filter out the noise and focus on the critical communications. That's why I almost missed the message that would change everything. At 11:47 a.m., as I was reviewing the final wire transfer instructions, my phone buzzed again. The message was from James Morrison, marked as urgent. But instead of the usual corporate communication, it was a simple text message to my personal phone. Samantha, effective immediately, your employment with Blackstone Ventures is terminated. Please vacate the premises and return all company materials. HR will contact you regarding final arrangements. I stared at the screen, certain I had misread the message. I checked the sender's number twice to confirm it was actually from Morrison. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The words seemed surreal, disconnected from the reality of what I was accomplishing. In less than 72 hours, I was supposed to close the largest deal in company history. The termination message made no sense. My first instinct was to call Morrison directly, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried his assistant, but she claimed he was in meetings and unavailable. I called the Chicago office and was told that Morrison was traveling and could not be reached. Every attempt to get clarification was met with polite deflection. The legal team working with me in the conference room noticed my distraction. Sarah Williams, the lead attorney from our external counsel, asked if everything was all right. I showed her the message, and her expression shifted from confusion to concern. This doesn't make sense, she said, reading the text again. You're the only person who fully understands this transaction. They can't close without you. That's when the reality of the situation began to sink in. I wasn't just being fired. I was being fired at the exact moment when my knowledge and expertise were most valuable. Someone at Blackstone had made a calculated decision to remove me from the equation just as the deal was reaching completion. The implications were staggering. Without my involvement, the closing would likely be delayed or potentially cancelled entirely. Dr. Hartwell had developed a personal relationship with me over the 18 months of negotiations. She trusted me to ensure that Blackstone would honor their commitments regarding research independence. If I wasn't there to represent those interests, she might decide to walk away from the entire transaction, but there was something else, something that Morrison and the Blackstone board didn't realize. In my 18 months of working on this deal, I had developed my own relationship with Meridian Technologies. Dr. Hartwell had mentioned several times that she wished she could work with someone who truly understood the scientific potential of their research. Someone who could provide the resources they needed without the corporate interference that typically accompanied major acquisitions. As I sat in that conference room, surrounded by documents that represented the culmination of my professional career, I realized that I had been presented with an extraordinary opportunity. The termination message had been intended to remove me from the equation, but it had actually freed me from the constraints of corporate employment. The acquisition documents were spread across the table in front of me. Every clause, every provision, every technical specification was familiar to me. I had written most of them myself. I understood the legal structure, the financial arrangements, and the operational requirements better than anyone else in the world, and in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of packing up my materials and leaving the building as instructed, I picked up my phone and called Dr. Hartwell directly. When she answered, I could hear the ambient noise of the Austin laboratory in the background. Dr. Hartwell, I said, I need to discuss a change in the transaction structure. Are you available for a confidential conversation? Dr. Hartwell's voice carried a note of curiosity when she responded. Of course, Samantha. What kind of change are we discussing? I walked to the far corner of the conference room, away from the legal team who were still reviewing documents at the main table. The Manhattan skyline stretched out beyond the windows, a concrete reminder of the corporate world I was about to abandon. The change involves me personally acquiring Meridian Technologies instead of Blackstone Ventures completing the transaction. The silence on the other end of the line lasted nearly 10 seconds. When Dr. Hartwell finally spoke, her voice was measured and professional, but I could detect underlying interest. That's certainly unexpected. Do you have the financial capacity to execute a transaction of this magnitude? I have access to the necessary funding through alternative channels. More importantly, I can offer you something that Blackstone never could, a partnership with someone who genuinely understands the scientific significance of your work. Over the next 20 minutes, I outlined a completely different vision for Meridian's future. Instead of becoming a subsidiary of a large corporate conglomerate, they would partner with a private investment group that I would establish specifically to support breakthrough technologies. The structure would provide them with even greater Independence while maintaining access to substantial capital resources. Dr. Hartwell asked penetrating questions about funding sources, operational structure, and long-term strategic vision. Her scientific background had given her a natural skepticism about promises that seemed too good to be true. But as our conversation continued, I could sense her growing interest in the alternative I was proposing. Samantha, this is a significant departure from our existing agreement. I would need to understand the complete financial and legal structure before making any commitments. Are you prepared to provide that level of detail? Absolutely. I can have preliminary documentation prepared within 48 hours. The question is whether you're willing to consider postponing the Friday closing to explore this alternative. Another pause, shorter this time. I think we should postpone it regardless. The news about your termination changes the fundamental assumptions underlying our original agreement. James Morrison was counting on your continued involvement to ensure smooth integration. Without you, I'm not confident that Blackstone will honor their commitments regarding research independence. That response confirmed what I had suspected. Dr. Hartwell's decision to work with Blackstone had been based primarily on her trust in me personally. Morrison's decision to terminate my employment had inadvertently undermined the entire foundation of the acquisition. Dr. Hartwell, I need you to understand something. If we pursue this alternative, there will likely be significant legal challenges from Blackstone. They've invested substantial time and resources in this transaction. They won't simply walk away without a fight. I understand the implications. But Samantha, I've spent my entire career fighting for the right to pursue scientific research without corporate interference. If there's an opportunity to achieve that goal while still obtaining the resources we need, I'm willing to face whatever legal challenges arise. After ending the call, I turned my attention to the immediate practical challenges. The first priority was securing the funding necessary to complete the acquisition. The second was establishing the legal structure for the transaction. The third was managing the inevitable confrontation with Morrison and the Blackstone board. The funding question was actually less complicated than it might appear. Over my 15 years in mergers and acquisitions, I had developed relationships with several private equity firms and ultra-high net worth individuals who specialized in alternative investment opportunities. The challenge wasn't finding investors willing to back the deal, but rather structuring the investment in a way that would satisfy regulatory requirements while maintaining the operational independence that Dr. Hartwell required. I spent the remainder of Tuesday afternoon making confidential calls to potential funding sources. The conversations were necessarily brief and somewhat cryptic, since I couldn't fully explain the situation without violating confidentiality agreements. But I was able to gauge interest levels and confirm that the necessary capital could be assembled within the required timeframe. Marcus Thompson, managing partner at Titan Capital Management, was particularly intrigued by the opportunity. His firm specialized in technology investments with significant intellectual property components. During our 20-minute conversation, he expressed strong interest in participating in the funding consortium. Samantha, quantum computing represents the next fundamental shift in information processing. If this company has achieved the breakthrough you're describing, the investment opportunity is extraordinary. We would definitely want to participate in a transaction of this magnitude. Rebecca Foster at Northbridge Investments had a similar response. Her firm focused on disruptive technologies with potential military and civilian applications. The dual-use nature of Meridian's quantum computing capabilities aligned perfectly with their investment thesis. The national security implications alone justify the investment, she explained. But the commercial potential across multiple industries makes this a generational opportunity. Count us in for whatever level of participation makes sense. By the end of Tuesday, I had preliminary commitments for approximately 60% of the required funding. The remaining capital would come from a combination of smaller investors and debt financing secured against Meridian's intellectual property portfolio. Wednesday morning brought the first direct confrontation with Blackstone. James Morrison called my personal phone at 7:15 a.m., before I had even left my hotel room near the Manhattan office. Samantha, what the hell are you doing? I'm getting reports that you're trying to interfere with the Meridian closing. This is completely unacceptable. His tone was a mixture of anger and confusion. Morrison had clearly expected me to quietly accept the termination and disappear from the situation. The possibility that I might take independent action hadn't occurred to him. James, you terminated my employment while I was in the middle of closing the most important deal of my career. Did you really expect me to simply walk away? I expected you to behave professionally. You have confidentiality obligations and fiduciary duties to this company. Whatever you're planning, you need to stop immediately. My confidentiality obligations relate to information I obtained as a Blackstone employee. My relationship with Dr. Hartwell and knowledge of quantum computing technologies extend beyond my corporate employment. I'm not violating any legal or ethical obligations. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Morrison alternating between threats and attempts at persuasion. He offered to reverse the termination decision if I would abandon whatever alternative I was pursuing. When that didn't work, he threatened legal action for interference with contractual relationships. I maintained a professional tone throughout the conversation, but I was careful not to reveal specific details about the alternative transaction I was developing. Morrison needed to understand that his decision to terminate my employment had consequences, but I didn't want to provide information that could be used to interfere with my plans. James, I've spent 18 months of my life building a relationship with Meridian Technologies. You made a decision to exclude me from the completion of that work. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences of that decision. After ending the call with Morrison, I focused on the legal structure for the alternative transaction. The challenge was creating an acquisition vehicle that could move quickly while satisfying all regulatory requirements. Traditional corporate structures would take weeks to establish properly. I needed something that could be operational within days. Sarah Williams, the external counsel who had been working on the Blackstone transaction, agreed to meet with me Wednesday afternoon to discuss the legal options. Her law firm had extensive experience with complex acquisitions, and she understood the technical requirements better than anyone. Samantha, what you're proposing is legally feasible, but the timeline is extremely aggressive. We would need to establish a special purpose vehicle, complete all regulatory filings, and prepare the acquisition documentation in less than 72 hours. It's possible, but it will require round-the-clock work from a large team. Cost is not a consideration. Whatever resources you need, make it happen. Sarah assembled a team of 12 attorneys who worked through Wednesday night to prepare the necessary documentation. The structure they developed was elegant in its simplicity. A special purpose acquisition company would be established in Delaware, funded by the private equity consortium I had assembled. That company would then acquire all outstanding shares of Meridian Technologies directly from Dr. Hartwell and the other shareholders. The legal documentation was substantially simpler than the original Blackstone structure. Without the need to integrate Meridian into a larger corporate hierarchy, many of the complex provisions became unnecessary. Dr. Hartwell would maintain complete operational control, with the acquisition company serving essentially as a passive financial partner. Thursday morning brought news that the situation had escalated significantly. Morrison had retained Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, one of New York's most aggressive litigation firms, to pursue legal action against me personally. They filed for a temporary restraining order that would prevent me from interfering with the Blackstone Meridian transaction. The legal papers were served at my hotel at 10:30 a.m. The complaint alleged breach of fiduciary duty, interference with contractual relationships, and misappropriation of trade secrets. Blackstone was seeking both monetary damages and injunctive relief that would effectively prevent me from pursuing the alternative acquisition. I immediately called Sarah Williams to discuss our response strategy. Her assessment was that Blackstone's legal position was weak, but that defending against the lawsuit would require significant time and resources. The good news is that most of their claims lack merit. You're not currently a Blackstone employee, so you don't have ongoing fiduciary duties. The confidentiality issues are more complex, but manageable. The bad news is that litigation creates uncertainty, and uncertainty kills deals. What's our timeline for getting the restraining order dismissed? If we file an emergency response today, we could have a hearing as early as Friday morning. But there's no guarantee the judge will rule in our favor immediately. Corporate litigation can be unpredictable. That afternoon brought another complication. Dr. Hartwell called to inform me that Blackstone had contacted her directly, threatening their own legal action if she proceeded with any alternative transaction. They're claiming that our existing agreement creates binding obligations that prevent me from working with anyone else. Their lawyers are saying that even exploring alternatives constitutes a breach of contract. Dr. Hartwell, those threats are essentially meaningless. Your agreement with Blackstone contains standard termination provisions that allow either party to withdraw for cause. My termination from Blackstone certainly constitutes cause for your withdrawal. I understand the legal position, but I'm concerned about the practical implications. Litigation is expensive and time-consuming. I need to focus on research, not courtroom battles. That conversation highlighted the fundamental challenge I was facing. Even if the alternative transaction was legally sound and financially attractive, the uncertainty created by litigation might convince Dr. Hartwell to abandon the entire process. Blackstone was using legal threats as a strategy to maintain control over the situation. I needed to demonstrate that the alternative transaction could proceed despite Blackstone's opposition. That required moving forward aggressively with the funding and documentation while simultaneously defending against their legal challenges. Thursday evening, I received the call that would change everything. Marcus Thompson from Titan Capital Management had completed his due diligence review of the transaction. Samantha, we've reviewed all the available information, and we're prepared to lead the funding consortium. But we need this deal to close within the next 48 hours. If it drags into next week, we'll have to withdraw due to other commitments. The ultimatum created tremendous pressure, but it also provided clarity. I had less than 2 days to complete one of the largest technology acquisitions in history while defending against legal challenges from my former employer. The situation was unprecedented, but it wasn't impossible. I spent Thursday night coordinating with the various parties involved in the alternative transaction. The funding consortium needed final documentation. The legal team needed signatures on dozens of corporate documents. Dr. Hartwell needed assurance that the transaction would actually close despite Blackstone's interference. By Friday morning, everything was in place except for one critical component. The wire transfer for the acquisition funding required approval from the Federal Reserve due to the size and international components of the transaction. That approval process typically took 5 to 7 business days. We had less than 8 hours. I called Rebecca Foster at Northbridge Investments, who had extensive experience with federal banking regulations. Her assessment was that expedited approval was possible, but would require intervention from someone with significant influence within the regulatory system. You need someone who can make a phone call and get immediate attention. This isn't the kind of request that gets processed through normal channels. That's when I remembered Senator Patricia Reynolds from Iowa. I had worked on a technology acquisition in her state 3 years earlier, and she had been supportive of the economic development it created. More importantly, she served on the Senate Banking Committee and had relationships within the Federal Reserve System. The call to Senator Reynolds was a calculated risk. Political figures generally avoid involvement in private commercial transactions. But the national security implications of quantum computing technology gave this situation a different character. Samantha, I remember you from the Cedar Rapids project. That was excellent work. What can I do for you? I explained the situation in broad terms, emphasizing the strategic importance of keeping Meridian's quantum computing capabilities under American control. Senator Reynolds understood the implications immediately. This technology could be critical to our national competitiveness. Let me make some calls and see what I can do to expedite the regulatory process. 2 hours later, the Federal Reserve approval came through. The alternative acquisition could proceed exactly as planned. At 2:30 p.m. on Friday afternoon, exactly when the original Blackstone closing was supposed to begin, I signed the final documents that made me the owner of Meridian Technologies. Dr. Hartwell signed simultaneously from Austin, while the funding consortium members executed their agreements from various locations around the country. The total transaction value was $4.2 billion, exactly the same amount that Blackstone had agreed to pay. But the structure was completely different, and the implications would reshape the entire technology industry. As I walked out of the Manhattan office building that Friday evening, my phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Dr. Hartwell. Samantha, I look forward to working with you to change the world. For the first time in 48 hours, I smiled. The euphoria of closing the deal lasted exactly 18 hours. Saturday morning arrived with news that would test every aspect of the new partnership I had created with Dr. Hartwell and the funding consortium. Marcus Thompson called at 6:45 a.m., his voice carrying an urgency that immediately put me on alert. Samantha, we have a serious problem. Blackstone filed an emergency petition with the Delaware Chancery Court claiming that your acquisition was fraudulent. They're seeking immediate reversal of the transaction and seizure of Meridian's assets. I was in my hotel room, still processing the reality of what had happened the previous day. The legal documents confirming my ownership of a $4.2 billion quantum computing company were spread across the desk next to my laptop. Now those same documents were being challenged in court. What's their legal theory? The transaction was properly structured and fully funded. They don't have standing to challenge a deal they're not party to. They're claiming that you used confidential information obtained as their employee to interfere with their contractual rights. More problematically, they're alleging that the funding sources are questionable and that the entire transaction was designed to circumvent federal oversight of foreign investment in critical technologies. That last allegation was particularly concerning. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States had broad authority to review acquisitions that might impact national security. If Blackstone could convince regulators that the transaction required CFIUS review, it could be tied up in bureaucracy for months. Marcus, is there any basis for their claims about foreign investment? Not directly. All of our consortium members are American entities. But two of the participating funds have limited partnerships that include international investors. It's not unusual, but it creates a potential regulatory issue that Blackstone is trying to exploit. The implications were staggering. Even if the foreign investment allegations were ultimately dismissed, the regulatory review process could freeze Meridian's operations and prevent them from continuing their research. Dr. Hartwell had warned me that her team couldn't survive extended periods of uncertainty about funding and operational control. I spent Saturday morning coordinating with Sarah Williams and her legal team to prepare our response to Blackstone's court filing. The challenge was demonstrating that the acquisition was legitimate while also addressing the regulatory concerns that had been raised. The Delaware court case is actually the smaller problem, Sarah explained during our conference call. Delaware judges are sophisticated about corporate transactions. They'll see through Blackstone's arguments fairly quickly. The CFIUS issue is more complex because it involves national security considerations that are outside normal commercial law. What's our strategy for dealing with the regulatory review? We need to file a voluntary CFIUS notification demonstrating that the transaction poses no national security concerns. If we're proactive about addressing their potential concerns, we can avoid having the review imposed involuntarily. That afternoon, I flew to Austin to meet with Dr. Hartwell and assess the impact of the legal challenges on Meridian's operations. The flight gave me time to process the magnitude of what I had undertaken. In less than a week, I had gone from being a corporate employee to owning one of the world's most advanced technology companies while facing litigation from one of the largest investment firms in the country. The Austin airport was experiencing typical weekend delays, giving me additional time to review the legal filings that Blackstone had submitted. Their arguments were more sophisticated than I had initially realized. They weren't simply claiming that I had acted improperly. They were constructing a narrative that portrayed the entire transaction as a complex scheme to circumvent regulatory oversight and harm American national security interests. The strategy was clever. By framing their commercial dispute in national security terms, Blackstone was inviting government intervention that could paralyze the transaction regardless of its ultimate legality. Even if they couldn't win in court, they could create enough regulatory uncertainty to force Dr. Hartwell to abandon the partnership. Dr. Hartwell met me at the Meridian facility at 4 p.m. The building was quieter than during my previous visits, with most of the research staff working reduced weekend schedules. But the quantum computing laboratory was operating continuously, with 3 technicians monitoring the processing units that formed the core of their breakthrough technology. Samantha, I need to be direct with you about something. The legal uncertainty is already affecting our operations. 2 of our key researchers have received job offers from competitors, and they're asking questions about the stability of our funding situation. What would it take to provide them with the reassurance they need? Honestly, a clear resolution of the legal challenges. My team needs to focus on research, not worry about whether they'll have jobs next month. If this litigation drags on for an extended period, I may lose people I can't replace. Dr. Hartwell walked me through the laboratory, explaining the technical aspects of their quantum computing breakthrough in more detail than I had previously understood. The processing units were about the size of large refrigerators, filled with superconducting materials that had to be maintained at temperatures approaching absolute zero. The quantum coherence they achieved allowed for calculations that were literally impossible with traditional computing methods. The climate modeling work that impressed your former colleagues was actually a relatively simple application of our capabilities, she explained. We're on the verge of breakthroughs in molecular simulation that could revolutionize drug discovery and materials science. But those advances require sustained research over the next 18 to 24 months. Dr. Hartwell, I understand the pressure you're facing. But I need you to understand something as well. Blackstone's legal strategy is designed to create exactly the uncertainty you're describing. If we allow them to force us into a quick settlement or abandonment of our partnership, they win by default. What are you proposing? We fight back aggressively. Instead of simply defending against their claims, we take the offensive. We demonstrate that their legal challenges are frivolous and motivated by commercial rather than legitimate concerns. Sunday morning brought an unexpected development that would shift the entire dynamic of the situation. Senator Patricia Reynolds called my personal phone with news that the Senate Intelligence Committee had taken an interest in the Meridian acquisition. Samantha, I've been asked to brief the committee on the national security implications of quantum computing technology. There are concerns that the legal dispute with Blackstone might compromise American leadership in this critical area. Senator, I can provide whatever information the committee needs to evaluate the situation properly. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Can you be in Washington tomorrow morning for a closed-door briefing? The committee wants to understand both the technical capabilities and the ownership structure before making any recommendations about regulatory review. The invitation to brief the Senate Intelligence Committee was both an opportunity and a risk. If I could convince them that the acquisition actually strengthened American national security interests, it would neutralize Blackstone's regulatory strategy. But if the briefing went poorly, it could result in government intervention that would be far more problematic than anything Blackstone could achieve through litigation. I flew to Washington Sunday evening, spending the flight preparing materials that would demonstrate Meridian's strategic importance and the benefits of the current ownership structure. The challenge was presenting technical information in terms that would be accessible to senators who might not have extensive backgrounds in quantum computing. The briefing was scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday morning in a secure conference room in the Hart Senate Office Building. The committee members in attendance included the chairman and ranking member plus 4 additional senators with particular expertise in technology and national security issues. Senator Reynolds introduced me to the committee, providing background on my experience in technology acquisitions and the circumstances that had led to the Meridian transaction. Her introduction was carefully crafted to present me as a responsible actor who had taken steps to protect American interests in critical technology. Committee members, Ms. Chen has acquired control of what may be the most advanced quantum computing capability in the world. The question before us is whether this ownership structure serves American national security interests better than the alternatives. I spent 45 minutes explaining Meridian's technical capabilities and the potential applications across military and civilian sectors. The senators asked sophisticated questions about processing capabilities, encryption implications, and manufacturing requirements. Several had clearly been briefed by their staff about the strategic significance of quantum computing. The most challenging questions came from Senator William Harrison of Texas, who served as the ranking minority member. He was particularly focused on the funding sources for the acquisition and the potential for foreign influence through the investment consortium. Ms. Chen, how can we be certain that foreign adversaries won't gain access to this technology through their investments in your funding partners? Senator, all investment decisions and operational control remain exclusively with American entities. The limited partnership structures that include international investors are common in private equity and don't provide any access to proprietary technology or strategic decision-making. But you're asking us to trust that commercial interests will always align with national security interests. What happens if there's a conflict between maximizing return on investment and protecting American technological advantages? That question went to the heart of the committee's concerns. I needed to provide assurance that wasn't just theoretical, but backed by concrete structural protections. Senator, I'm prepared to accept oversight mechanisms that would ensure alignment between commercial operations and national security interests. We could establish a government security board with veto power over any decisions that might compromise technological advantages. The offer seemed to surprise several committee members. Creating voluntary oversight mechanisms was unusual for private companies, especially ones that weren't operating under government contracts. But it demonstrated a level of commitment to national security that might address their concerns. After the formal briefing concluded, Senator Reynolds asked me to remain for a private conversation with the committee leadership. The discussion was more informal, focused on practical steps that could address regulatory concerns while allowing Meridian to continue its research operations. Samantha, the committee is generally supportive of your acquisition, but we need political cover if this becomes a public issue. The oversight board you proposed is a good start, but we might need additional transparency measures. Senator, I'm willing to consider whatever measures would provide the committee with confidence in our operations. The priority is ensuring that Meridian can continue developing technologies that serve American interests. Tuesday brought news that our legal strategy was beginning to show results. The Delaware Chancery Court had issued a preliminary ruling, rejecting Blackstone's request for immediate reversal of the acquisition. The judge's opinion was particularly critical of Blackstone's argument that they had continuing rights over a transaction they were no longer party to. Sarah Williams called with details of the court's reasoning. The judge basically said that Blackstone's termination of your employment eliminated any claim they might have to your continued loyalty or involvement in the transaction. Their own actions created the situation they're now complaining about. What about the CFIUS review? Are we still facing regulatory challenges? Actually, that situation has improved significantly. The voluntary notification we filed is being processed on an expedited basis. The National Security Review Board you discussed with the Senate committee seems to have addressed most of their concerns. Wednesday afternoon, I received a call that would provide the final resolution to Blackstone's legal challenges. James Morrison was calling personally, without lawyers or intermediaries, to discuss a potential settlement. Samantha, this situation has gotten out of hand. Both of our companies are spending enormous amounts on legal fees, and the publicity is damaging everyone involved. I think it's time to find a reasonable resolution. Morrison's tone was completely different from our previous conversations. The anger and threats had been replaced by a businesslike pragmatism that suggested he was ready to negotiate seriously. James, I'm always willing to discuss reasonable proposals. What did you have in mind? We withdraw all litigation and regulatory challenges. In exchange, Blackstone receives a minority equity position in your acquisition vehicle and preferred rights to participate in any future transactions involving quantum computing technologies. The proposal was actually quite reasonable. Morrison was essentially acknowledging that the acquisition was legitimate while negotiating a face-saving resolution that would provide Blackstone with some benefit from the situation they had inadvertently created. I'd need to discuss that proposal with my investment partners and with Dr. Hartwell. But it sounds like something we could work with. Samantha, I owe you an apology. The decision to terminate your employment was made hastily, without full consideration of the consequences. You built something extraordinary with the Meridian relationship, and we should have recognized that. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, working through the basic terms of a settlement agreement. By the end of the call, we had outlined a structure that would resolve all legal disputes while providing benefits to all parties involved. Thursday morning, I convened a conference call with Dr. Hartwell, Marcus Thompson, Rebecca Foster, and the other key stakeholders in the acquisition. The purpose was to discuss Morrison's settlement proposal and determine whether it was acceptable to all parties. Dr. Hartwell's response was pragmatic. If it eliminates the legal uncertainty and allows us to focus on research, I support it. Blackstone's minority participation might actually be beneficial if it provides access to additional resources and expertise. Marcus Thompson was more cautious. We need to ensure that Blackstone's equity position doesn't give them any operational control or access to proprietary technology. But if we can structure it properly, their participation could increase the overall value of our investment. By the end of the conference call, we had reached a consensus to proceed with settlement negotiations. Sarah Williams and her team spent Thursday afternoon working with Blackstone's lawyers to develop detailed agreement terms that would satisfy all parties. The settlement was finalized Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the original acquisition closing. Blackstone would receive a 15% equity position in the acquisition vehicle in exchange for withdrawing all legal challenges and providing a $500 million additional investment to support Meridian's expansion plans. James Morrison and I signed the settlement documents in the same Manhattan conference room where I had been working when I received the termination text message. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of us. Samantha, I have to admit that you've handled this entire situation brilliantly. Turning a termination into a $4.2 billion acquisition opportunity is something that will be studied in business schools for decades. James, sometimes the best opportunities come from the most unexpected circumstances. I'm glad we found a way to make this work for everyone. As I walked out of the building that Friday evening, I reflected on the extraordinary week that had transformed my life completely. 7 days earlier, I had been a corporate employee working on someone else's deal. Now I was the owner of one of the world's most advanced technology companies, with partnerships that spanned the private equity industry and oversight relationships with the United States Senate. But the most important outcome was that Dr. Hartwell and her team could continue their research without the constraints that would have been imposed by traditional corporate ownership. The quantum computing breakthroughs they were developing would benefit from the resources and independence that our partnership provided. My phone buzzed with a text message as I reached the street. This one was from Dr. Hartwell, sent from the Austin laboratory where she was working late to prepare for the next phase of their research. Samantha, the future just became much more interesting. For the second time in a week, I found myself smiling as I walked through the streets of Manhattan. But this time, the smile was accompanied by the knowledge that the real work was just beginning. 3 months after the settlement with Blackstone, I was standing in a converted aircraft hangar in Nevada, watching Dr. Hartwell's team conduct the most ambitious quantum computing experiment ever attempted. The facility, which we had acquired from a defunct aerospace company, housed 12 quantum processing units working in parallel to simulate the molecular structure of a potential Alzheimer's treatment. The pharmaceutical company Novus Therapeutics had approached us with a challenge that traditional computing couldn't solve. They needed to model the interaction between an experimental drug compound and specific proteins in the human brain. The calculations required to simulate those molecular interactions accurately would take conventional supercomputers approximately 400 years to complete. Our quantum processors could do it in 6 hours. Dr. Hartwell stood at the central monitoring station, watching data streams that represented billions of molecular interactions occurring in simulated space. Her team had grown from 12 researchers to 47, recruited from universities and research institutions around the world. The Nevada facility had become a destination for the brightest minds in quantum physics and computer science. Samantha, what we're seeing here changes everything we know about drug discovery, she explained, pointing to patterns emerging on the display screens. We can test thousands of potential treatments simultaneously, identifying the most promising candidates before any physical experimentation begins. The implications extended far beyond pharmaceutical applications. The same quantum modeling capabilities could revolutionize materials science, energy storage, artificial intelligence, and dozens of other fields. Every major corporation in the world was beginning to understand that quantum computing represented the next fundamental shift in technological capability. My role had evolved significantly since the acquisition. Initially, I had focused on providing funding and removing operational obstacles. Now I was essentially serving as CEO of a technology empire that was reshaping multiple industries simultaneously. The responsibilities were both exhilarating and overwhelming. The morning brought news that would test our growth in an entirely new direction. David Chen, my former colleague from Blackstone who had become our primary liaison since the settlement, called with an extraordinary proposition. Samantha, I've been authorized to discuss something that could dramatically expand Meridian's capabilities. The Department of Defense has a classified project that requires quantum computing power beyond anything currently available. They're willing to fund the development of next-generation processors specifically for national security applications. The defense contract represented a potential $2.8 billion opportunity over 5 years. More importantly, it would provide resources to develop quantum computing capabilities that were years ahead of anything in the civilian sector. The technical challenges would push Dr. Hartwell's team into entirely new areas of research. David, that sounds like an extraordinary opportunity. What are the constraints and requirements? The work would be conducted at a separate facility with appropriate security clearances. Dr. Hartwell and her core team would maintain their current research independence, but a portion of their work would be classified. The technology developed under the contract would have both military and civilian applications. The defense contract created a complex decision matrix. Accepting it would provide enormous resources and technical challenges that could accelerate quantum computing development by years. But it would also introduce security requirements and government oversight that might complicate our operational independence. I arranged a meeting with Dr. Hartwell and the key members of her research team to discuss the defense opportunity. The conversation took place in the secure conference room we had constructed adjacent to the main laboratory, designed to prevent electronic surveillance of sensitive discussions. The defense work represents the cutting edge of what's possible with quantum computing, Dr. Hartwell explained to the assembled researchers. We would be developing capabilities that don't currently exist anywhere in the world. But we would also be accepting constraints on publication and collaboration that could limit the civilian applications of our discoveries. Dr. Michael Torres, the head of quantum algorithm development, raised the concern that many of the team members were considering. Elizabeth, how do we ensure that classified work doesn't prevent us from pursuing the civilian applications that originally motivated our research? The contract structure includes provisions for parallel development tracks. Military applications would be classified, but the underlying quantum computing advances could be applied to civilian projects without restriction. The discussion continued for nearly 3 hours, exploring every aspect of how the defense contract might impact their research objectives. The team's conclusion was unanimous. The opportunity to work on the most advanced quantum computing challenges in the world outweighed the constraints that came with government classification requirements. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room at the Pentagon, finalizing the details of the defense contract with representatives from DARPA, the National Security Agency, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. The meeting was my first experience with the intersection of advanced technology and national security policy. General Patricia Walsh, the DARPA program manager overseeing the quantum computing initiative, explained the strategic context for the project. Ms. Chen, the United States is in a technological competition with adversaries who are investing heavily in quantum computing capabilities. This contract represents our commitment to maintaining American leadership in technologies that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. General Walsh, we understand the strategic importance of this work. Meridian is committed to developing capabilities that serve American interests while advancing the broader field of quantum computing. The contract negotiations revealed the complexity of balancing commercial interests with national security requirements. Every technical specification had implications for both military applications and civilian commercialization potential. The government needed assurance that critical technologies would remain under American control, while we needed flexibility to pursue market opportunities that would sustain our long-term growth. Colonel James Rodriguez, the NSA's senior technology advisor, focused particularly on personnel security and information protection requirements. The quantum computing capabilities you're developing could potentially break existing encryption methods. We need absolute assurance that this technology won't be compromised by foreign intelligence services. Colonel Rodriguez, we're prepared to implement whatever security measures are necessary to protect classified work. Our team includes several researchers who already hold security clearances from previous government work. The Pentagon meetings concluded with agreement on a contract structure that would establish a separate Meridian division focused exclusively on defense applications. The classified facility would be constructed in Colorado, with security measures designed to protect technologies that could reshape the global balance of power. Returning to Nevada, I found Dr. Hartwell and her team preparing for another breakthrough that would demonstrate quantum computing's potential in an entirely different field. The Environmental Protection Agency had approached us about using quantum modeling to optimize renewable energy systems and predict the effects of climate change mitigation strategies. The EPA project represented the intersection of quantum computing with one of the most pressing challenges facing humanity. Traditional climate models were limited by computational constraints that prevented accurate simulation of complex atmospheric and oceanic interactions. Quantum processors could model those systems with unprecedented precision. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had recently joined Meridian from Stanford's climate science program, was leading the environmental applications team. Her background combined atmospheric physics with quantum algorithm development, making her uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between climate science and advanced computing. Samantha, what we're developing here could transform how governments approach climate policy, she explained during a briefing on the EPA project. We can model the effects of specific interventions with accuracy that was previously impossible. Policymakers could evaluate the impact of carbon reduction strategies before implementing them. The climate modeling work was conducted in partnership with the National Center for Atmospheric Research and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The collaboration provided access to decades of environmental data and validation. From established climate scientists, the first major results emerged 6 weeks into the EPA project. Quantum modeling had identified previously unknown feedback loops in the relationship between ocean temperature and atmospheric carbon absorption. The discovery suggested that existing climate change predictions might be significantly underestimating the rate of environmental change. Dr. Kim presented the findings to a joint meeting of EPA administrators and congressional staff members responsible for environmental policy. The briefing took place in a secure facility outside Washington, with attendance limited to individuals with appropriate clearances. Quantum modeling reveals that current carbon reduction targets may be insufficient to prevent catastrophic climate change, Dr. Kim explained to the assembled policymakers. But it also identifies intervention strategies that could be more effective than anything previously considered. The environmental work attracted attention from international organizations and foreign governments seeking to understand quantum computing's potential applications. The European Union's Climate Research Consortium requested a briefing on our methodologies, while the Chinese government made unofficial inquiries about potential collaboration opportunities. Managing these international interests required careful navigation of national security considerations and commercial opportunities. The defense contract prohibited sharing certain quantum computing techniques with foreign entities, but the environmental applications had potential benefits for global climate cooperation. Senator Patricia Reynolds, who had become our primary liaison with Congress, arranged a closed-door briefing for the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. The purpose was to explore how quantum-enhanced climate modeling might inform American environmental policy while maintaining technological advantages. Committee members, the quantum computing capabilities developed by Meridian represent a new tool for understanding complex environmental systems, Senator Reynolds explained during her introduction. The question before us is how to leverage these capabilities for both domestic policy and international climate cooperation. The committee's questions revealed the complexity of applying advanced technology to environmental challenges that crossed national boundaries. Climate change required international cooperation, but quantum computing capabilities provided strategic advantages that might be compromised by excessive sharing of technical details. Senator Margaret Foster of California, the committee chairman, focused particularly on the policy implications of the quantum climate modeling. Dr. Kim, if your modeling suggests that current climate targets are insufficient, what would be the recommended changes to American environmental policy? Senator Foster, the modeling indicates that achieving meaningful climate stabilization requires both more aggressive carbon reduction and active intervention to remove existing carbon from the atmosphere. The quantum simulations identify specific technologies and policies that could achieve those objectives. The environmental work was generating commercial interest from companies seeking to optimize their operations using quantum-enhanced modeling. Energy companies wanted to use the technology to improve renewable energy systems, while agricultural corporations sought applications for crop optimization and resource management. Tesla's engineering team approached us about using quantum computing to optimize battery chemistry and energy storage systems. The modeling requirements were similar to the pharmaceutical applications, involving molecular-level simulations that traditional computers couldn't handle effectively. Elon Musk personally participated in the initial discussions, recognizing that quantum-enhanced battery development could accelerate the transition to sustainable energy systems. The Tesla partnership represented our first major commercial application outside of research and government contracts. Samantha, what you've built here represents the future of how human beings solve complex problems, Musk observed during his visit to the Nevada facility. The combination of quantum computing power and practical applications could address challenges that seemed impossible just a few years ago. The Tesla partnership was structured to provide them with quantum computing services while maintaining Meridian's independence and intellectual property rights. The collaboration would focus on battery chemistry optimization, energy grid modeling, and autonomous vehicle decision-making algorithms. By the end of the fourth month after the Blackstone settlement, Meridian had evolved from a small research company into a quantum computing enterprise serving pharmaceutical, defense, environmental, and energy applications. The Nevada facility housed over 60 researchers, while planning was underway for the classified Colorado facility and a third location focused on commercial applications. The financial results reflected the dramatic expansion of our capabilities and market reach. Revenue for the quarter exceeded $180 million, generated primarily from consulting contracts and early-stage commercial applications. The defense contract would add another $560 million annually once the classified facility became operational. Marcus Thompson and the investment consortium were extraordinarily pleased with the returns on their quantum computing investment. The company's valuation had increased from $4.2 billion to an estimated $12.8 billion in less than 6 months, making it one of the fastest-growing technology companies in history. Samantha, you've created something that transcends traditional business categories, Marcus observed during our quarterly investor meeting. Meridian isn't just a technology company. It's becoming the infrastructure for how advanced societies solve their most complex problems. The success was attracting attention from competitors and potential acquirers. Google, IBM, and Microsoft had all approached us about partnerships or acquisition discussions. Foreign governments were making increasingly sophisticated offers for access to our quantum computing capabilities. Managing these competing interests required careful balance between growth opportunities and maintaining the independence that had enabled our rapid development. Dr. Hartwell remained committed to scientific advancement over purely commercial considerations, while the investment consortium sought maximum return on their substantial commitment. The challenge was scaling our capabilities without losing the innovative culture that had produced our breakthrough achievements. Quantum computing required researchers who could think beyond conventional computational limitations. Finding and retaining those individuals was becoming increasingly difficult as demand for quantum expertise exploded across multiple industries. My personal transformation had been as dramatic as Meridian's growth. 6 months earlier, I had been a corporate employee working on someone else's deal. Now I was managing relationships with the Pentagon, Congress, Fortune 500 companies, and international organizations while overseeing one of the world's most advanced technology enterprises. The responsibilities were unprecedented, but so were the opportunities. Quantum computing was still in its early stages, with applications that hadn't even been imagined yet. Every month brought new possibilities for applying our capabilities to challenges that had seemed impossible to solve. As I stood in the Nevada facility that evening, watching Dr. Hartwell's team prepare for the next day's experiments, I realized that we had reached an inflection point. The decisions we made over the next 6 months would determine whether Meridian became a transformative force in human technological development or simply another successful company in a rapidly evolving industry. The quantum processors hummed quietly in their temperature-controlled chambers, processing calculations that were reshaping our understanding of reality itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new responsibilities that none of us had anticipated when this journey began, but tonight, surrounded by the most advanced technology on Earth and the brilliant minds who had created it, I felt a profound sense of possibility about what we might accomplish together. The crisis began with a single encrypted message that arrived at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my temporary apartment near the Nevada facility when the secure communication system we had installed for government contracts activated with an urgent alert tone. The message was from Colonel Rodriguez at the NSA. Meridian quantum signatures detected in Chinese research facility. Immédiate consultation required. Within 6 hours, I was sitting in a windowless conference room at NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland, staring at satellite intelligence that would threaten everything we had built. The images showed a facility outside Beijing that contained quantum processing equipment with architectural similarities to our Nevada installation. Ms. Chen, we have credible intelligence suggesting that classified aspects of your quantum computing technology have been compromised, Colonel Rodriguez explained, his voice carrying the weight of a national security crisis. The Chinese facility appears to be using processing techniques that mirror your proprietary developments. The implications were staggering. If our quantum computing advances had been stolen, it would compromise American technological superiority in critical defense applications. Worse, it could invalidate the entire defense contract that was funding our most advanced research. Director Amanda Foster from the FBI's Counterintelligence Division joined the briefing via secure video link. Her assessment was direct and alarming. We're investigating potential industrial espionage involving several American technology companies. Meridian's quantum computing capabilities would be an extremely high-value target for foreign intelligence services. Director Foster, our security protocols were designed specifically to prevent this type of compromise. All classified work is conducted in the Colorado facility with appropriate clearances and physical security measures. Ms. Chen, the sophistication of modern espionage operations extends beyond traditional security measures. We're seeing attacks that exploit supply chain vulnerabilities, personnel recruitment, and electronic surveillance methods that can bypass conventional protections. The investigation would require examining every aspect of Meridian's operations, from hardware suppliers to research personnel. The process could take months and would inevitably disrupt our research programs while creating uncertainty about our future government contracts. I returned to Nevada that evening to find Dr. Hartwell waiting in my office with concerns about the investigation's impact on her research team. Word of the security review had spread quickly through the quantum computing community, creating anxiety about potential restrictions on international collaboration and publication. Samantha, my researchers are asking whether this investigation will prevent them from participating in international conferences or collaborating with colleagues at foreign universities. The quantum computing field requires global cooperation to advance effectively. Dr. Hartwell, I understand their concerns. But we need to balance scientific openness with national security requirements. The investigation will determine whether additional security measures are necessary. The next morning brought another complication that would test our crisis management capabilities. The Wall Street Journal published a front-page story about the NSA investigation, with details that suggested someone with inside knowledge had provided information to the reporter. The headline read, "Quantum Computing Startup Under Federal Investigation for Technology Theft." The article included specific details about our defense contracts and classified research that should not have been publicly available. Marcus Thompson called within minutes of the article's publication. Samantha, this publicity could be devastating for our commercial partnerships. Companies won't want to work with us if they think we're a security risk. Marcus, the investigation is precautionary. We haven't been accused of wrongdoing. The government is simply ensuring that our security measures are adequate for the sensitive work we're conducting. That distinction may not matter to potential partners. Perception often matters more than reality in business relationships. The stock market reaction was immediate and severe. Although Meridian was privately held, our publicly traded partners saw significant declines. Tesla's stock dropped 4% on concerns about their quantum computing collaboration, while several pharmaceutical companies suspended discussions about potential partnerships. Dr. Hartwell and I spent the afternoon developing a communication strategy that would address legitimate security concerns while maintaining confidence in our operational integrity. The challenge was providing transparency without compromising ongoing investigations or classified information. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lisa Chang, one of our quantum algorithm specialists, approached me with information that could explain the Chinese facility's apparent similarities to our technology. Samantha, I've been reviewing the satellite images from the NSA briefing. The equipment configuration in Beijing looks similar to our setup, but it's actually based on older quantum computing principles that were published in academic journals several years ago. Dr. Chang, are you saying that the Chinese facility isn't using our proprietary technology? I'm saying that what looks like technology theft might actually be parallel development using publicly available research. The quantum computing field has been advancing rapidly worldwide. Multiple teams could independently develop similar solutions. Dr. Chang's analysis provided a potential explanation that would resolve the security concerns without implicating Meridian in technology transfer violations. I immediately contacted Colonel Rodriguez to share her findings and request a meeting with NSA technical specialists who could evaluate her assessment. The NSA meeting took place 2 days later, with Dr. Chang presenting her technical analysis to intelligence officials and quantum computing experts from the agency's research division. Her presentation was thorough and convincing, demonstrating that the Chinese facility's capabilities could be explained through legitimate research rather than espionage. Dr. Robert Kim from the NSA's Quantum Research Division confirmed Dr. Chang's assessment. The analysis is sound. The Beijing facility appears to be using quantum processing techniques that are consistent with published research rather than classified American developments. Colonel Rodriguez seemed relieved by the technical findings. This resolves our immediate concerns about technology compromise. However, we'll still need to review Meridian's security protocols to ensure adequate protection for future classified work. The security review process would continue, but the focus shifted from investigating potential espionage to strengthening protective measures for ongoing defense contracts. The change in emphasis allowed us to continue normal operations while cooperating with government security requirements. Returning to Nevada, I found that the crisis had actually strengthened our team's cohesion and commitment to the company's mission. The researchers who had been concerned about security restrictions now understood the strategic importance of their work and the need for appropriate protective measures. Dr. Hartwell convened a meeting of the entire research staff to discuss the lessons learned from the investigation and the implications for future work. Her message was clear: scientific advancement and national security were compatible objectives that required careful balance rather than compromise. Our work has the potential to benefit humanity while serving American interests, she explained to the assembled team. The security requirements we're implementing will protect our discoveries while ensuring they can be applied to challenges that matter. The crisis resolution had an unexpected positive effect on our commercial relationships. Companies that had initially been concerned about security risks now viewed our government clearances and security protocols as competitive advantages. Working with Meridian meant accessing quantum computing capabilities that were validated by American intelligence agencies. General Motors approached us about using quantum computing to optimize electric vehicle battery performance and autonomous driving algorithms. Their executives were particularly interested in our security-cleared status, which would allow collaboration on technologies with potential defense applications. The pharmaceutical partnerships also accelerated, with 3 major companies signing development agreements for quantum-enhanced drug discovery programs. The security investigation had actually validated the strategic importance of our capabilities while demonstrating our commitment to protecting sensitive technologies. 6 weeks after the crisis began, I received a call from Senator Reynolds with news that would transform our relationship with the federal government. The Senate Armed Services Committee had voted to designate Meridian as a strategic national asset, providing protection from foreign acquisition attempts while ensuring priority access to government research funding. Samantha, this designation recognizes that quantum computing represents critical infrastructure for American competitiveness. The committee wants to ensure that companies like Meridian have the resources and protection needed to maintain technological leadership. The strategic national asset designation came with both benefits and responsibilities. Meridian would receive preferential consideration for government contracts and protection from hostile takeover attempts. In exchange, we would accept additional oversight and reporting requirements that would ensure our continued alignment with American interests. The designation also opened new opportunities for international partnerships that served American foreign policy objectives. The State Department approached us about quantum computing cooperation agreements with allied nations that would strengthen technological partnerships while maintaining American advantages in critical capabilities. Dr. Hartwell embraced the international Collaboration opportunities, particularly those involving climate research and scientific advancement that transcended national boundaries. The quantum climate modeling work was generating interest from European research institutions and environmental organizations worldwide. The resolution of the security crisis marked a turning point in Meridian's evolution from a private technology company to a strategic national resource. Our quantum computing capabilities were now recognized as fundamental infrastructure for American competitiveness in the 21st century. As I reviewed the company's position 6 months after the original acquisition, the transformation was remarkable. Meridian had grown from a small research company to a quantum computing enterprise serving defense, commercial, and international applications while maintaining the scientific integrity that had made our breakthroughs possible. The personal journey had been equally transformative. The text message termination that had seemed devastating at the time had actually freed me to pursue opportunities that would have been impossible within traditional corporate constraints. Sometimes the worst moments create the foundation for the most extraordinary achievements. Standing in the Nevada facility that evening, watching our quantum processors tackle challenges that had seemed impossible just months earlier, I realized that we had barely begun to explore the potential of the technology we had acquired. The future held possibilities that none of us had yet imagined, limited only by our willingness to push beyond conventional boundaries and embrace the extraordinary potential of quantum computing to reshape human civilization itself. 1 year after that life-changing text message, I stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, preparing to announce a breakthrough that would redefine humanity's relationship with technology. The quantum processors we had developed were about to solve a problem that had plagued civilization for decades: efficient, clean energy production on a global scale. Dr. Hartwell's team had successfully modeled nuclear fusion reactions at the quantum level, identifying the precise conditions needed to achieve sustained fusion at temperatures and pressures previously thought impossible. The discovery would make clean fusion energy commercially viable within 5 years, potentially ending humanity's dependence on fossil fuels. Distinguished delegates, I began, addressing representatives from 193 nations. The quantum computing breakthrough I'm about to share belongs not to any single country or company, but to all of humanity. Today, we're announcing the formation of the Global Quantum Initiative, a partnership that will apply these technologies to challenges that transcend national boundaries. The audience included heads of state, Nobel laureates, and technology leaders who understood the magnitude of what we were proposing. Quantum-enhanced fusion energy could power human civilization for millennia while eliminating carbon emissions. The implications for climate change, global development, and international cooperation were transformative. President Emily Richardson, who had taken office 6 months earlier, had personally endorsed the Global Quantum Initiative as a cornerstone of American technological leadership. Her administration recognized that sharing certain quantum computing advances would strengthen international partnerships while maintaining American advantages in critical defense applications. The announcement generated immediate worldwide response. Stock markets surged as investors recognized the commercial potential of quantum-enhanced fusion energy. Environmental organizations celebrated the potential end of fossil fuel dependence. Developing nations saw opportunities to leapfrog traditional energy infrastructure entirely. Dr. Hartwell joined me at the podium to explain the technical breakthrough that had made commercial fusion possible. Her presentation was accessible to non-scientists while conveying the revolutionary nature of the discovery. Quantum computing allowed us to model nuclear reactions with precision that revealed previously unknown pathways to sustained fusion, she explained. We can now achieve fusion at temperatures of 50 million degrees Celsius instead of the 150 million degrees previously required. This reduces the energy input needed to maintain fusion reactions by 70%. The fusion breakthrough was the culmination of research that had expanded far beyond our original quantum computing applications. Meridian now operated facilities on 4 continents, employed over 2,000 researchers, and maintained partnerships with governments, universities, and corporations worldwide. The company's valuation had reached $47 billion, making it one of the most valuable private technology companies in history. More importantly, our quantum computing capabilities were addressing challenges in medicine, climate science, artificial intelligence, and space exploration that were reshaping human possibilities. The pharmaceutical partnerships had produced 3 new cancer treatments that were entering clinical trials. The climate modeling work had identified geoengineering strategies that could reverse atmospheric carbon accumulation. The defense applications had strengthened American national security while maintaining global stability, but the personal transformation remained the most profound aspect of the entire experience. That Tuesday morning termination had forced me to reimagine what was possible when conventional constraints were removed. The crisis had revealed opportunities that would never have existed within traditional corporate structures. Marcus Thompson and the original investment consortium had achieved returns that exceeded their most optimistic projections. The 15% equity stake that Blackstone had received through the settlement was now worth over $7 billion, vindicating Morrison's decision to negotiate rather than continue litigation. James Morrison himself had become an advocate for unconventional business strategies, frequently citing the Meridian acquisition as an example of how unexpected opportunities could emerge from apparent disasters. He had established a venture capital fund specifically focused on supporting entrepreneurs who were pursuing transformative technologies outside traditional corporate frameworks. Dr. Hartwell had achieved her original vision of conducting pure scientific research while having access to unlimited resources. The quantum computing capabilities we had developed were enabling discoveries that would have been impossible through conventional research methods. She was already planning experiments that would explore the fundamental nature of reality itself. The Global Quantum Initiative represented the next phase of our evolution, transitioning from a private company to a quasi-public institution dedicated to applying quantum computing to humanity's greatest challenges. The structure would maintain scientific independence while ensuring that breakthrough technologies served global rather than purely commercial interests. As I concluded my remarks to the UN General Assembly, I reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A single text message had triggered a sequence of decisions that ultimately created technologies capable of transforming human civilization. The quantum computing revolution represents humanity's transition to a new era of problem-solving capability. I told the Assembly. The challenges that have seemed impossible throughout human history, clean energy, disease elimination, climate restoration, space exploration, are now within our reach. The only limitation is our willingness to embrace possibilities that extend beyond conventional thinking. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, but the real validation came in the months that followed. The Global Quantum Initiative attracted participation from every major industrialized nation and most developing countries. Research programs were established to apply quantum computing to local challenges while contributing to global knowledge advancement. Walking through the Nevada facility that evening, I paused at the conference room where I had first received Morrison's termination message. The space had been converted into a meditation area for researchers. Recognizing that breakthrough thinking often required periods of quiet reflection, the quantum processors continued their constant operation, solving problems that were reshaping human understanding of what was possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities that none of us could fully anticipate. But tonight, surrounded by technologies that had emerged from a moment of apparent professional disaster, I understood that the most extraordinary achievements often begin with the courage to embrace uncertainty and transform obstacles into opportunities. The text message that ended my corporate career had actually begun the most important work of my life. Sometimes the worst moments create the foundation for the most remarkable transformations. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.